Okay, good to see you again for our first lecture in lecture series on Iranian studies, and we have the honor to host today a good friend that although we have been in touch for quite many
10 years.
Yes, but we never came to see each other, and today was the festive day. So welcome to Dr. Walter Posch. He's a polyglot. He speaks a lot of languages, among them German, Turkish, Persian, Kurdish, Italian.
No, not
Italian.
I failed in Italian.
Okay.
French.
French, and if I missed any, and Ladino. Ladino, not the Israeli or Jewish Ladino. There is a certain language of the Tyrol. Yes, local language.
Yes. But this is all we are assimilated already.
Okay.
My father not, but I am.
He studied Turkish and Islamic studies in Vienna during 1986 and 1992, and in Istanbul 1993-94. He has done his PhD on the 16th century Ottoman-Iranian relations in Bamberg University in Germany. From 2000 to 2004, he worked as a Middle East expert focusing on Iran, Iraq, and the Kurdish issue at the National Defense Academy of the Austrian Army in Vienna, and in the same function at the European Institute for Security Studies, EUISS, in Paris between 2004 and 2009, and at the German Foreign Policy Foundation between 2010 and 2014 in Berlin. Since 2015, Dr. Posch is back to the National Defense Academy in Vienna. He publishes on current affairs as well as on Ottoman and Iranian history. And we are thankful to him that he is now, during a conference in Jerusalem, he was willing to come here to us and talk about only proxies, Iran and the Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria. And we are expecting very much to hear what you have to say about this, which is very, I would say, connected to us in Israel because of the Iranian activity mainly in Syria. Please, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Soli. It's indeed a festive day also from my perspective that we meet finally after so many years. What I would like to present, let me for a short minute explain what we are doing at the NDA. Our department is an academic department, so there is no secret document we work on. We are in the loop of many affairs, but we are created to keep the contact to academics, to international renowned academics, and to bring them, if possible, to Austria. So people should not be afraid that this is a tough military institute. These are our neighbors, but we are, so to speak, the civilians. In a way, we are trying, both at the institute and supported by the government, to function as an Austrian think tank. You know, Austria is a very small country. We don't have the intellectual capacities and traditions other nations, bigger nations, do have with foreign policy research institutes. We are totally government funded, and we are half civilians and half military. So to begin with, the reason why I started to work on the Iran and its Shiite friends in the region is a very simple one. To begin with, one of my focus is Iranian foreign and security policy, working mostly with Persian sources. So I did recently in Survival an article on the nexus between ideology and strategy in the case of Iran, and I did several papers on Iranian foreign policy. The second point is that in previous years I was working more in Iraq, and putting this together, I think it was May last year, I got a phone call from the Ministry of the Interior they told me they're confused. They would like to know more about where are the good and where are the bad guys in Iraq and in Syria. And so I said, I don't know what you'd understand with good and bad, but I can offer you something. I can write something on Iran and its relation to the Shiite militias in the region. And this was accepted. I've handed in the study. It's about 60 pages. And since November, this has been cleared. This means that I can use it for my academic purposes. So I'm now updating it. And I have a thesis and nobody to talk about this thesis yet. And so when this chance came to, not to reenact, but to participate at a conference in Jerusalem, I immediately called Soli. And what I would like to present to you is now my take of Iran and the Shiite militias. And I'm very much interested at which points you are differing or confirming. I do not say, I say the plain truth. I just say that I have worked to understand it. Mine is about understanding. I have no agenda. This is not my thing. So let us start with terminology. The first point: militia and militancy. We have a history of Shiite militancy, sometimes leading to militias throughout the Middle East, let's say at latest since the 1960s. We all know the different Amal militia in Lebanon, later the creation of Hezbollah, but also the Amal of the Shirazi and Modaresi group, which was active in the 1980s, especially as in 70s, 80s, centered ironically around Zainabiyya for a while in Damascus. And we have several other groups popping up. When we looked at them right now, they appear all as to be in the Iranian pocket. What is true to a certain degree. Let's take, just for the historic record, the Amal of the Shirazi and Modaresi Ayatollahs and their own history. There was always this social intellectual movement. There was this cooperation with certain elements of the Revolutionary Guards until the year 1986. But even if they have done things, involvement in terrorism in the name of the global Shiite revolution, it would be too far an argument to say they were in the pocket of the Iranians. And we could immediately see they were connected to one of the Iranian groups. In this case, it was the group around Montazeri, the so-called Mehdi Hashemi gang. But calling them to be proxies or to work directly for the Iranians would be the wrong thing. And this is something which puzzles us, because the relationship was not that what we would expect from a proxy, that it's obedient and follows its. It was a negotiated one. And once you kill the Iranian side of the negotiators, as it happened with Mehdi Hashemi, who was executed on behalf of, by the way, the Revolutionary Guards, and the reason why he was executed is quite interesting, gives us an inkling about how the Iranians think about how to deal with Shiite radical groups. In this case, it was simply, I would say, a cost-benefit analysis plus a domestic problem with Ayatollah Montazeri and with Mehdi Hashemi, and the will of the Iranian state, I use the term deliberately, even if it's a revolutionary state, of the Iranian state, to keep foreign policy and action abroad, out of the country, under its own control. This, whereas Mehdi Hashemi and his Shiite groups said, well, we are the real revolutionaries, spreading the revolution with methods we decide. By the way, the person to bring down the Mehdi Hashemi gang in the late 80s was no one less than Rahim Safavi, the former commander of the Revolutionary Guards. Now, this affair has another name in the West. It's the Iran-Contra affair. It was a very big affair in the 1980s. But in Iran, it is the Mehdi Hashemi affair. And if we want to understand the Iranian approach, it's worth to look at it, because it shows very much the domestic dynamics interlinked with regional dynamics. And one can't legitimately say that the Iranians were just at this point where they said, well, we don't control this any longer, so switch it off altogether. Which changed this, the Shirazi and Modarresi Amal. We know the two interlinked families of the Shirazi Ayatollahs and the Modarresi Ayatollahs, very noble, very important families. But they fell from the late 1980s onwards out with the Iranian regime, and all the splinter groups they have created, like Hezbollah in Saudi Arabia and so on, and groups in Bahrain. All these groups were in a way free-floating radicals. There was no place more to go. There was definitely no more Shirazi money, and there was definitely no more, which is more important, guiding light from the Shirazi. Today, both the last mentioning of this Amal militia was in 2009 by the Congressional Research Service document, where they said, well, they play a certain role in Karbala, and I guess today they are not more than just a group of armed people who support, who kind of provide personal security for the Modarresi and Shirazi Ayatollahs, the few who are still alive. What is important is the legacy. The legacy is Sayyida Zainab. They retreated there. All the remainder of them retreated to Sayyida Zainab. And this center was built up in the early 70s, still under Hafiz al-Assad, with the older brother of one of the Shirazi, namely Ayatollah Hassan Shirazi. And he was in cahoots with the brother of Hafiz al-Assad to convert the Alawites towards Shiaism. And but this was a backwater. This was absolutely not important. From the Syrian perspective, they were in so far useful that if you allow the Shia in, the 12 Shiites in, with Iraqi and Iranian connection, why not allowing the opposition to the Iranian Ayatollah? So you would find Nimr al-Nimr, who was very critical of Khamenei, the Saudi Ayatollah there for a while. You would find other people. And the Sayyida Zainab was, in the years of Saddam Hussein, and the only place in the Middle East where you could be 12 a Shiite, not under Iraqi government control and not under Iranian control. And it's quite evident that this is something the Iranians did not like. We know the relationship between the Lebanese Amal, not related to the Shirazi Amal, and the Lebanese Hezbollah is not such cordial. And the aim of the Iranians was always, of the Rahbari, of the supreme leadership, to streamline all the group, at least to accept the leadership of the supreme leader as their marja, or to promote the principle of velayat faqih. They were benefiting from the fact that almost all mainstream Shiite groups, mainstream Ayatollahs, were under control in the 1990s or in prison or somewhere, and the only ones to be free were those who follow the velayat faqih. So there are three, I would say, shifts in Shiite militancy then. If we take to this, that one is the Iran-Iraq war, the 1991 Intifada, and then of course the 2003 invasion. So those three events in a way changed the inner development of the Shiite groups. There was one exception though, and this was the Dawa party with a small, minuscule militant group, which actually was not so important, but which turned out to be in long term extremely important. And this was the Mujahideen group, the Mujahideen of the Islamic Revolution in Iraq, created around 79, 1980. And herein, within this group, one person plays an important role whom I regard as some kind of a glue of the diverse Shiite trends, Shiite Iraqi trends, also being in a liaison with the Iranians. it has to do with Badr, on this later. This is the person in question is Jamal Jafar Muhammad Ali al-Ibrahim. Excuse my Arabic pronunciation, it's Persian because I'm an Iranist. Called Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes, the General Secretary and the operational chief of today's Hashd al-Shabi. His career gives us a kind of an overview of how the relationship between the Shiite groups among themselves and with the Iranians changed. He was born in 54, towards 79 or 80. He was one of the creators of the Mujahideen, Lisawda al-Islamiyya Iraqi. According to him, according to his own testimony, they are in the Dawa tradition, so it's not the Velayat Faqih tradition, they are Dawa people. And he stresses that from the beginning on, a certain Mahdi Abed Mahdi, also known as Abu Zainab Khalisi, was a key figure there. His alleged involvement in terrorist attacks, obviously in cooperation with the Shirazi Amal, he rejects. He says officially, I've never been to Kuwait and I was just there, but I have nothing to do. Be that as it is, he relatively lately comes to the newly created Badr Corps, namely 1948. He then writes about his career, how he rose through the ranks, and makes the point that in 1991 he was already infiltrating from the Iranian side during the big uprising, the big intifada against Saddam Hussein, that he was there, and that much of his grudge against the Americans goes back with 1991 because everybody let the Shiites down. His subsequent career in Badr, both Badr and the Supreme Council of the Islamic Revolution in Iraq, more or less unbroken until 2002, reveals that already there was a strong tension, I would call it a triangular tension. On one hand, he never rejected but never officially embraced the Velayat Faqih principle, which is different than to what the Iranians want. The second hand, he fell out with the Iraqi al-Hakim family, who was starting to run the Supreme Council of the Islamic Revolution and trying to get hold of Badr, but they were running this like a personal fiefdom. He then, around 2003, creates the Kataib Hezbollah out of nothing, so we don't know, at least I don't, perhaps you know, but I don't know exactly where he got the people from. It is not local based, the militants. This Kataib Hezbollah is very often confused with other Hezbollah groups. A few years later, he remains silent for years. He's known, he's active, both in the framework of this Hezbollah, in the underground. He pops up here and then, and in 2011, between 2011 and 2013, he's getting very agitated to build up in Syria the Abu Fazl Abbas Brigade, and since 2014 he's in the Hashd al-Shabi in a prominent position. What is his speciality? What is important about him? He's experienced, he has a long history of Shiite militancy, and he has gravitas in the Shiite system, in the revolutionary Shiite system. This is not somebody that you can push around. This is a person you contact politely, you speak with politely, and this is something which distinguishes him from others. I have already mentioned the Badr Brigade. We know much, meanwhile, quite a lot about it. I would say the most important point is that it has been an Iranian IRGC creation. Around the same time, the Iranian Intelligence Ministry was founded, but unrelated to it, in 1984. It has been a unification of the Mujahideen, the ideologues from Iraq, who were in the underground, experienced people, young, enthusiastic, but experienced underground people, and the Ahrar. The Ahrar were the so-called freedom fighters, were Iraqi prisoners of war who decided to join the revolutionary cause. There were not many. The Iranians were quite shocked that there were not 100,000 switching over to the Iranian side. And this already created some tensions. The Ahrar wanted to have there was a difference between these simpler followers, I would say, and the radicals of the Mujahideen. But what is important, Mohandes again mentions the importance of Al-Khalisi as a founder, and when you read the interviews he gives to Revolutionary Guards newspapers, you realize there must be big personal tensions right now, because he says such a great person like Mr. Al-Khalisi, by the way, somebody whom the Americans imprisoned several times because they regarded him as extremely dangerous, whom he described as a fantastic organizer. Such a person, he said, should not be forgotten, and was laying the groundwork that this worked, that they could cooperate and coordinate these different groups. But the Iranians never gave up control of it. First, although the vetting was done by the Supreme Council and by the Hakim Ayatollahs and their trusted devotees, it was a General Major Esmail Dakoyaki who died in 1987, who gave it its original framework, and its original task. And they were, from those days on, together with the Qods Force, and in a way supporting the Qods Force, acting in the marsh area behind enemy lines in Iraq and trying to build up trustworthy cells in the region. Badr was also present in 1991 during this Intifada. Today, almost all Iraqi Shiite militias, groups, whatever you call them, claim that they have been present in 1991, and if there was had been a little bit more support, they would have kicked out Saddam Hussein altogether. This might be even serious from their perspective, but I don't know. The main important point is that in 2003, when Badr returns, there are two models of how to continue to be in Iraq. The main model is the model we know. This is the Badr Corps returning, giving up, or at least not being present as a military force, calling itself Munazamat al-Badr, under Hadi Farhan Abdullah al-Amari, the man who's still heading Badr, and cooperating with the new American occupation. Cooperating meaning, in this case, they were slowly, silently, very constructively becoming policemen. So that in the end, the Iraqi police in key functions was dominated by Badr. But they kept their militia identity all this year. From an Iranian perspective, Hadi al-Amari is not only an Iranian citizen, also is one of the few Iraqi Badr fighters who were allowed Iranian citizenship. He is also married to an Iranian, and he has his family in Iran. So I think he has 2 sons or 1 son. I don't know how many children, but his children are living in Iran. This gives, at the same time, he was then later on transport minister, tried several times to become interior minister, but just to have him included into the new emerging security apparatus, a police force of Iraq, is just a masterstroke of the Iranians, which everybody knew. I mean, I know nobody who knows a little bit about the Iraqi Shiites. Everybody said, okay. And one of the wrong analysis and the wrong conclusions we drew in Vienna, we said, well, the Americans must be aware of this too. So in the end, if they can exist with someone like Hadi al-Amari in the prominent positions in the Iraqi security apparatus, the ultimate aim of the Americans will be to find a rapprochement with Iran. I mean, you don't put somebody who also, both Hadi al-Amri and other people of Badr were also actively involved in torturing other Iraqis. So, other Iraqi Shiites. So, this was, so to speak, the core Badr presence in the ministries. 2012, the split we know, but there was a second group. A second group which simply said, no, we don't do this. We do not cooperate with the Americans. We do not sell out our honor. And they insisted also on keeping the name Badr. They were led by a certain person who died in 2015, Mr. Mohammadawi. Of this version of Badr we know nothing, but the documents, the obituaries published by the Revolutionary Guards are very clear that they make the point these people, as soon as the new occupation started, meaning the American occupation, they cooperated and worked hard to drive the Americans out. And they were this also led some American experts to conclude Badr is one of those special groups who was fighting against the Americans. I don't think I have to go into details on the Supreme Council of the Islamic Revolution and its changes. They have a minor militia with the Ashura battalions today, and they lost steadily on the militia level, but Badr remained. And the legacy of what I would call of the Sadriyin remained, namely the Mahdi army. We have now three, I would say, models. I have already mentioned in 2003 Mohandes calling his militia Hezbollah with a reason. By the way, to be distinguished from the Iraqi Hezbollah again has only the name Hezbollah, is basically a tribal network of smugglers, with one exception, with Hassan al-Sari, who was a political activist, had a small group, fled to the swamps, met Abu Hatem, a certain the very well-known Abu Hatem there, and they joined forces. But Abu Hatem's interest and the so-called Iraqi Hezbollah's main interest is economic and not political, in the sense to get economic benefits, whereas Sari tried really to make a political cause and implement the Islamic Revolution. Mohandes' Hezbollah tradition, he claims he went a step closer to the Iranians, but tries to combine a little bit Dawa ideological ideas with the prestige of the Lebanese Hezbollah, which I don't think I have to detail here now, which automatically puts the fight against Israel in the center, or the liberation of Palestine, take it as you want. And this Hezbollah tradition has proven, I call it already a tradition because you can see it in slogans, you can see it in a form of iconography, you can see it in the flags, in the symbols, you can see the prominence they give Jerusalem, the prominence they give Nasrallah, combine it with Khomeini, but also he very much with the Iraqi tradition. So he created something which then other groups would copy, be they split-offs of his Hezbollah or others. The Badr, as we have them fixed there, and as a third tradition I would call the Sadriyin and the Jund al-Mahdi. The Mahdi army originally simply the ramshackle militia coming out from the underground movement of his father, Muhammad Sadiq al-Sadr, in the 1990s, a very uneasy relationship with both Iran and Najaf. So we have a problem with both. It's a, let's call it social populist or sans culotte movement, headed by today also by Muqtada Sadr, who changed very much over the years. But this Muqtada originally had neither a real plan what to do, nor how to manage it, and he was not in control of all. Very early on, two groups split off at the Fazleh in Basra, with Ayatollah Muhammad Yaqubi and Ismail Mosbagh al-Wael. His brother is being the governor of Basra. Just to, as an example, Ismail Mosbagh al-Wael was the representative of Muhammad Sadiq in Iran, and when the Iranians told the Supreme Council of the Islamic Revolution, namely Abdulaziz al-Hakim, to tell him to silence the anti-Saddam propaganda because they are up for a rapprochement with Saddam. It was Abdulaziz who tortured him. Hence, a very strong hate between the two groups. Given the close relations between the Supreme Council and Badr, often in personal union, you can also read the 2007 important charge of the Knights attack against Shiite militias as a fight between Badr in uniforms of the police and the Fazila party and its followers and its militias. They were strong in the petrol ministry, strong also in the oil fields, in the oil field security forces and so on. They are still important in Baghdad, in Basra, but are not a big mover player. But you see already the strong infighting within the Shiites. The second more important group is what later became the Kataib Tahrir Risali, with the former speaker of Muqtada Sadr Sheikh Adnan Shahmani, who over the years built up and finally in 2014 created the Tahrir Risali. There are two more groups who are now, so the Iranians tried to come closer to Muqtada Sadr. We all know how it failed, but they were not entirely without success. They managed, and the people they tried to get close to were, I was overseeing this point for a while, but now having talked with the Iranian experts, it's quite clear. They were approaching Sheikh Qais al-Khazali and Akram al-Ka'bi, both being former Sadr loyalists, and one created the Asaib Ahl al-Halq, which very quickly became a nightmare for the Americans, also because it's said to be very efficient. And the other one, again, picking up on the Hezbollah tradition, an organization which in shorthand is called Nojaba. Now, why would the Iranians pick these two people of all? Very simple, the tribal names. Both the Khazali and the Ka'bi have more tribal members in Iran than they have in Iraq. So, if now from an Iranian security point of view, if you have your most prominent and most active tribal member being a sheikh in Iraq with a militia form, and the only thing he's talking about is Jerusalem, fighting Daesh and so on, this is much better than if you have a liberal intellectual with the tribal name Khazali sitting in Tehran and writing about Arabic language rights in Khuzestan. I mean, and the same thing for the Ka'bis. In the case of Ka'bi, this very ambitious young man managed to become the wakil, the representative of several ayatollahs. Safi Golbaygani, Syed Qasim Hosseini Ha'eri, Sayyid Mahmoud Hashemi Shahrudi, Nouri Hamdani, Alevi Gorgani, and even Makarem Shirazi. So when he collects their Khums money in Iraq or Syria or elsewhere, he has money on his own. Not only this, he also has excellent relations to the candidate to the candidate who lost against Rouhani, Mr. Raisi, or in full name Ayatollah Rais al-Sadat. What means Mashhad. Again, Mashhad money. So he doesn't need too much Iraqi money, not even Hashchavi money. He will take it, but he has sources on his own. And the Iranians therefore have invested. I would say these are the two key people they were investing in for a future. And in both cases, you see a mixture of Hezbollah thinking, of Sadrist thinking, and then sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on how the debate inside Iraq is raging, more or less pictures of Imam Khomeini. So they are a clear step closer to Iran, or better say, to the supreme leader, than is Mohandes, ideologically. in pure security terms, Mohandes is and Hadi al-Amri are the men to go to, because they have the experience, but these two are, in a way, I see them as an investment into the future. In this context, they are already in Syria. In this context, let's have a look at the other groups which were disbanded, but which are, in my view, real implants from Iran. The first was Jaish al-Mukhtar of Wasik al-Baghdad, who died in 2014. His main job, or his main task, self-proclaimed task, was fighting the People's Mujahideen organization. Now, there's a lot of reasons why Iraqis would be unhappy with the People's Mujahideen organization, but the single focus of an Iraqi organization to go after the People's Mujahideen in all that Iraqi chaos is something which has to raise suspicion. Now, if you read the Iranian obituary of, or one of the Iranian obituaries, and those of his fan club within the Revolutionary Guards, Mashrak News and all these papers, you know them, then they say, well, in 1991, because the People's Mujahideen were part of the Iraqi security detail, and the young Iraqi generation hates the People's Mujahideen so much, and they are so angry with Saudi Arabia that they had to do something against them. So in 2009 and 10, his people were attacking Camp Ashraf. In 2013, there was this incident on the Saudi border, and in 2015 they were shooting at Camp Liberty. What for? Absolutely not in the Iraqi security interest. Because on the contrary, Adnan Shahmani with his party and later militia was negotiating with the Americans the exfiltration, or how the People's Mujahideen were leaving. So the Iraqi national interest was clearly defined as get them out, but don't necessarily kill them. Whereas from an Iranian perspective, Mukhtar's actions make sense if you have them as real proxies doing your bidding. Another group which was quickly disbanded, was it took 5 years. Sarollo. Sarollo is, for everybody who has studied the Iranian security apparatus and the Revolutionary Guards, is something where some red light goes up, because Sarollo was this very unit which was created as a task force immediately a few years in 82, I guess, to break the back of the Tudeh party. So this was really, they did what they meant. Also, from 2000 until 2009, from 99 to 2009, the command post to deal with the potential domestic unrest in Tehran was called Qarargah Sarollah, often with the same people who were in the 15 years earlier killing communists. What does this Sarollah group in Iraq do? Nothing but killing Baathists. Nothing. They overdid it a little bit, because the Baath was not just a minority party, it was just a big party. So there was big unhappiness, again, but with the system. And it hints for me very well that this is also that nobody misses them. There is no Iraqi justification for them. This was, in my view, this is the second purely implant. Also because when they did the nasty work, or the nasty part of the work, they always cooperated with police units which were under control of Badr, or manned entirely by Badr. The third group, so they don't exist any longer, but it shows what this, in my view, these are the poorest proxies of Iran. And the third real pure proxy was created somewhere as a reaction on Syria, that's called Sarayat al-Khorasani, and it was created by an Iranian brigadier general. Now, Iranian brigadier general sounds much. Iranian brigadier general is not so much. Basically, it's all there are so many of them without any command and so on. But this one was a gentleman. Children grew up, and he was in his late 50s, early 60s, and he wanted to know it again. Went to Iraq and to Syria, created this group, and was killed in action in 2015 in Samarra. Again, the action was not where you expect the brigadier general to be, but he created this. And if you look at the background, what he did during a war, something comes clear. He was between 1980 and 88. He was in the Qarargoh's Ramazan. Ramazan, as we know, was responsible for training Shiite and Kurdish groups to do the basic training and the basic build-up for them before they were distributed to other units. And he explicitly created these groups in a reaction to Syria 2011. The Sarayat, they still exist, the Khorasani still exist, but are not so important, or I hope they are not become important tomorrow. So Khorasani, why Khorasani? The time of its creation was Ahmadinejad's years. We all remember during Ahmadinejad's time when this strange story of the Sayyid Khorasani came, that there's a mystical figure before the Mahdi comes, and he's from Khorasan, and it is clearly a reference to Khamenei. Also, the fidelity, they are very much on their homepage. It was very clear that they're absolute Khamenei followers. Also, in his last interview, and his daughter also made this point very clearly, how much her father always loved the supreme leader. And again, 2015 dead in Samara, and hopefully the group doesn't rise to power again. These were the real, where I would really say these are not only proxies and implants where you really could see that the direct command going to Tehran. I don't go too much into the Hezbollah tradition in Iran right now. I think I should explain a little bit how I imagine the Iranian cooperation with these groups was originally planned. And of course, it doesn't work without mentioning the Qods Force and General Soleimani. Now, in Western media, both are extremely exaggerated. Special forces are special for the human beings like everybody. They need jobs, they need order and so on. And we, thanks to a speech of Khamenei, we know exactly how he imagines the Qods to function. Namely, to create trustworthy Hezbollah cells in wherever it is wanted, and then to be able to make these Hezbollahs, which means a group which believes in the Velayat Faqih and in all what is Hezbollah thinking, and to at the later point to transform them into military and intelligence units. Originally, it was created to act behind enemy line. Also already I mentioned that they were cooperating with Badr, or were leading the Badr forces, and since 2009 they are an independent military branch of the Revolutionary Guards, hence the elevation to Niru. They are equal to the land and the sea and the air force of the Revolutionary Guards. Direct list of commands, and typical Khamenei, the commanding officer, Mr. Soleimani, not only headed the same Division 41 of the Revolutionary Guards during the war as the formal chief of the chief of the Revolutionary Guards, General Jafari. Both hate each other, are from the same town, the same area, and are now equal in rank. Khamenei wanted to have somebody who understands tribal affairs, local affairs, and someone who is deep in the politics, what we could call the politics of the axis of the resistance, which means you know your your Iraqi counterparts, and especially you know who has what to say in Lebanese Hezbollah. And if you look at the pictures, the published pictures of General Soleimani with Haj Rizwan, Imad Muqniyeh, and the son of Imad Muqniyeh, so he was really catering to the Iranian radical community that this is the man to go, because he knows Lebanese Hezbollah so well. Often it happens that retired officers from the Qods Force are serving in the Iranian Foreign Ministry. The Department of the Middle East Department is full of them, and they are, and to the best of our knowledge, they remain in their own culture zone. So Arabic is the language they know well. English they know very badly, and I doubt they know another language. And the rest must be analyzed. I don't. But for this we know. We also know their role in Afghanistan and in Bosnia. Soleimani himself, of course, has been lionized in a way which I never understood. What are his special capabilities? Well, cultural knowledge, fine. When you remain in your comfort zone, it's easy to have cultural knowledge. Political experience, yes. He understood, and this was perhaps his best, his strongest card to play, and the most humiliating for the Americans, because he understood these Shiite groups and the inner working in Iraq very well. No wonder he knew them for 20 years. I mean, if you have to deal with it, actually, if you look at him from an Iranian perspective, he's quickly downsized. Both, yes, the unit was created to combine military and intelligence and politics. Fine, good, but it's not that he's running the Middle Eastern affairs in Iraq, because if he would run them, IS would never have had a chance, in my view. He has a better overview of Shiite militias groups and their relationships. That's all nice, but I think that's about it. So the Qods Force is usually in Arab countries, when they have a military attaché, he's also from the Qods Force, which also shows that Iran, which is logical when you're because. Usually military attachés are from the Revolutionary Guards and not from the army. And it's also logical for another reason, because when your main job is to coordinate revolutionary cells, groups and so on, and to coordinate with governments, you would go for someone like this. This happens, of course, in Syria. Syria is the center of Iranian interest. We can talk about this later if you want. But in Syria, until 2011, it was an ordinary job. Qods people were in the Iranian embassy, had also their outpost, and would coordinate the day-to-day work with Lebanese Hezbollah, with the Syrians, and the help they needed. Things changed when the situation exploded in Syria, and one of these the results was that the Iranians were forced to invest more in Syria. Whereas Qods remains as a broader coordination center, and some diplomatic tasks were also given to Soleimani. It's not diplomatic task, but he had the priority. All ambassadors had listened to him, which is logical when you have a crisis situation like that. But main job still the coordination. But there were neither enough troops from the Iranian side nor from anybody else. So they changed the setup from 2012 onwards, and then again in 2014. By sending more. Now, how are the Iranians present in Syria? The first thing was that with the process with the crisis in Syria, they did not only call in Revolutionary Guards, but a few years ago even a regular army unit, 65 Airborne Division. Not the whole unit, but some elements of it, and I doubt that the unit still is really a division. I would rather say if it's a brigade, it's good, but they call themselves the Green Berets. They are in the tradition of the Green Berets, trained originally by the French, and they are army. They are filling gaps in training and in coordination, both with the Russians and the Syrians, and of course these militias. But they are not leading the effort. They are additionally there to get experience, and their experience will be used for the next step of the army reform in Iran. The next group was based on an embarrassment. Perhaps you remember when Iranian retired officers in Syria got caught. They were posing as journalists, and people get hold of their footage, and you could prove that they were Iranians. Actually, they were retired. They were close retirement. They were all in their late 50s. Or were they bored, whatever. They were volunteering, and nobody could stop them. So they went on their own, using their contacts to Syria. The catastrophe taking place by identifying them, and one of them was, for instance, a colonel at the police in Gilan, and so on, so with names and rank. This led the Iranians to decide that from now on they have to join. Everybody who was former Revolutionary Guards has to join the sovereign unit. Goes to an introduction and retraining, and then you be replaced to Syria, and you serve in the sovereign, mostly around Zainabiyya, which meanwhile has become a stronghold of pro-Iranian Shiites. The second one, if they're from the siege, they go to the Fatahin unit. Anybody else with an Iranian citizenship is not allowed to serve. So Afghans who would serve in in the Afghan battalion would be kicked out and resent with Afghan personal documents, so that no Iranian citizen apart from outside of these three with the Qods 4 units would be in Syria. The core element, however, was the build-up of the Abul Fazl al-Abbas brigade, which was co-initiated by a cleric in Najaf, Mr. Altai, and you find both the Kataib Hezbollah, you find Asaib Ahl al-Haq, you find Sayyid al-Shuhada and other minor groups, and you find also a newfound group, namely Akram Kabi's Nujaba Harakat Muqawamat or Harakat Hezbollah al-Nujaba. Now, what are they doing there? First of all, it was one way to channel Iraqi volunteers there. Secondly, the Iranians were building up the Zainabiyya issue very high. They were also getting away in the Western media with it that Hazrat Zainab, which was a no place for Shiite pilgrims for the last 1,000 years, became kind of almost the center of the Shiite interest. So much that people in Iraq indeed did volunteer there. The rule is very simple. We know this. American scholars have done a very fine work analyzing this. So first you go to one of the Iraqi militias, then you go, depending on your expertise and on the role you will have, either to Iran or to Lebanon, and then you join the Abul Fazl. Internal security is run between Hezbollah and the Iranians, and the defense, the overall effort, the overall aim is to build up a real strong Syrian-based Arab Hezbollah-like force. In the current phase, still focusing on IS and focusing on stabilizing the Syrian regime. This is not, when we talk to the Syrians, we were always telling them that many in the West will judge their space of maneuver, whether they will be able to get rid of the Shiite militias afterwards or not. And the Syrians know, the Iranians know that we're talking with the Syrians about these things. Abul Fazl was originally planned to safeguard Zainabiyya, to make it sound more pacifist or less aggressive, but in fact they were in use everywhere. Strictly under the framework with the Syrian army, where for the Syrians it was they needed troops, and they get some of them wherever they get them. Another issue for the Iranians to provide these troops, which was to send in the Afghans. The Afghans were both from Afghanistan and from Iran, including the little amount of Afghan Shiites who was already in the region. There were not many. Their battalion, they call it a brigade, but it's some kind of a battalion. Not all of them are voluntarily there. Many of them are there with deals. Young people fighting there would then get their €1,000 and ticket to Istanbul and then make it to Europe. and those who are married are lured in with the promise of Iranian citizenship, better access to education, etc. So there is a clear quid pro quo from the Iranian side. Also, the Iranians finally managed Ayatollah Mohaqqaqi to embrace this group, which was very unlike the other Ayatollahs. The leading clergy of Najaf and Karbala, several, including Nimr al-Nimr, were very unhappy with what happened to Zainabiyya, because they said this is the foundation, and this will sharpen the Shiite-Sunni divide dramatically. Shiite-Sunni divide is very open with the 3rd Battalion, and that totally controlled by the Iranians, and that is Zainabiyya. The Zainabiyya people are mostly from 2 regions in Pakistan, Punjabis and Parachinar, and a lot of Indian Shiites also. And for them, the fight in Syria is a continuation of the tensions they have at home with the Wahhabis. So for them, this is all about Shiite dignity. I cannot beat my Wahhabi molester here in Pakistan, but I can give them a beating in Zainabiyya in Syria. So the Iranians, the first thing the Iranians managed is, I would say, together with Hezbollah, to clearly strengthen the Abu al-Fazl brigade, to train the trainers, to elevate them on also militarily to on a relative good level, but also leadership-wise. So their aim is that Abu al-Fazl becomes a standing force on its own. And then it would be around Zainabiyya the rallying ground for the Afghans and for the Pakistanis. Until now, this works. The core task to secure the area between Damascus and the airport is fulfilled. They also provide troops for others. They also rearranged, for instance, in the case of Nujaba, who were fighting in Aleppo, they rearranged who is responsible for what, and they were able to exfiltrate their fighters when the situation in Iraq became very, very serious. And this brings me to my last point. In Iraq in 2014, with the breakthrough and the breakdown, I would say, of the Iraqi army. In this case, the Grand Ayatollah Sistani issued a statement. I didn't find it in his fatwa collections, and we went it up and down, and we don't see the fatwa. And he never personally said that to create militias is a good thing. On the contrary, he said the defense of the nation. He was all about the defense of the nation, and he warned that this must be under the state control. We come to this legal question later on, but this allowed a lot of politicians like Adnan Shahmani and others to recreate or to invoke militias immediately, so that one has to think that the preparations for creating militias has been in the pipeline for a while. At least this is my reading. At least those militias who were fighting, like the Asaib and then the Nujaba in Syria already, were in no mood in case the fight is over, to lay down arms and to go back to Iraq and do nothing. We can clearly see a split between the like a split in 3 groups between the Hashd Shabi. Of course, it's as a pragmatic framework, it worked, and it is in a more greater trend. We just had a conference in Vienna where we talked about the fact that second armies are in the creation everywhere in Muslim countries, including Turkey, by the way. And they could fulfill a task normally the army would do. Now the problems that this did not end the debate about the future of the Hashd-Shabi. The first point was that Sistani and, interestingly, Muqtada Sadr said, well, we want to send them to the regular army, strengthen the regular army, and build up the regular army. Now, a merger between the almost equally strong, the integration is almost impossible because the numbers are too high. What kind of merger they imagine, I don't know. But at least some of the troops who were, I don't want to say under control, but who were Marja'iyya militias in Karbala and Najaf, were already infused into units of the regular army. Muqtada also showed his good wanted to show himself as a good example by disbanding his own military academy and saying, in the long run, also my unit will be an ordinary unit and part of the army. And we talked with Sheikh Shahmani in Vienna about this problem, about the double function headedness of political and military function. He said, yes, it's a problem, but this is the Iraq we have. He's very aware of that. There's, so to speak, then the second group, neither Sistani or Muqtada's, but more close around the Kataib Tayyar Risali and Mohandis, who say, well, it will be a second army, but it will, because born out of necessity, and it's most important to keep it under a chain of command. And the third group says, well, this is the nucleus. This will be exactly like the Revolutionary Guards, and it will exactly like the Revolutionary Guards have a regional-wide approach. Now, what are the risks right now? The first risk is, on the positive side, is that the Hashjabi debate inside Iraq goes into a middle position, that this is a unit for Iraq because Iraq is as it is. Even talks about more inclusiveness for Sunnis, for Christians, and so on are on the way. The risk is more with Syria and with those who say we would like to be like Hezbollah, or who believe the propaganda that the fight against IS is the fight against Zionism because the Zionists are behind IS. Many people believe this. As long as it remains propaganda and doesn't become politics, fine. But the risk is that if we now go to the actors, Qais al-Khazali and Akram al-Kabi, with their ambition, just imagine their political space for them, which would be necessary if you want to make a more moderate Hashjabi in Iraq. You have to limit their political space, which increases the risk that they are more active in Syria. And when you which is what is possible. The third possibility is that one or both of them will add additional power, firepower, manpower mostly, to the Lebanese Hezbollah. In a way, this would be less dangerous and less risky than having them in Syria and building up some kind of a imagined super Hezbollah, which would be the rallying point of all radical Shiites who have no relation to the region, because Lebanese Hezbollah, for all its vices, it has a relation in Lebanon. It knows the region. It is, in a certain degree, more predictable, and it knows what it means to tackle with Israel. With these younger people, with these less educated, with their less educated followers, the risk, if the Syrian state is not strong enough, provided this, that they do actions on their own and that they slip out of their Iranian control, or that the Iranians just look the other way when they move towards the Israeli border, is, I don't want to say very high, but it's existing. I don't want to exaggerate it. So, what does this mean for the West? As a preliminary conclusion of all this, I would say, strengthening the Hashd-e-Sha'bi and getting as much Iraqis back to Iraq and putting them into a chain of command, including Qais al-Khazali, including Akram Kabi, is much more. Yes, they are very close to Iran, and yes, it will be more complicated, but that's the fate of a puffer state. But it is better for both the Syrians and the Israelis, and even I would say Lebanese Hezbollah, because it puts out, it draws out a radical element which does not know what to do with its real or imagined strength. I don't know what happened if, for instance, when Qais al-Khazali comes to the wall. Yes, Lebanese Hezbollah is strong enough; it controls the propaganda and so on. For threatening, it's good enough. But if this is substantiated with hundreds or thousands of newly battle-hardened Iraqi Shiites, I think we're in a different game then. So this is my preliminary conclusion, and I'm afraid I'm talking too long.
Thank you very much for a very in-depth and detailed analysis of the situation. And it's we are now open to questions. Please. Yes, Glenn. Please.
Thank you. I don't know much about Syria. In fact, I know nothing about Syria. But the question of Iraq is something which I've worked on, having directed the psychological warfare operations in Iraq for the US military for most of the 2003-2010 period. And we grappled exactly with this topic. And we started by looking at mosque and state, where our starting point obviously was Mirza Malcolm Khan, dating back to 1900, 1905, through to Jalal al-Ahmad, the introduction of Marxism, imperialism into the 79 revolution, and obviously Ayatollah Khomeini's own Walayat al-Faqih. How does the clergy govern? To understand, try to comprehend a political clergy when Persian Shiaism looks at his political clergy as being heretic. And that gave us the starting point of trying to understand how groups operated in Iraq. Were they Shiite, looking to defend Shiite against Sunni or against other invasion groups such as the American Army? Or were they political to the extent of being extreme political and using violent means and just adopting a Shiite mantle for whatever reason, whether, as we could say in Cold War terminology, nationalism. So that was our starting point of the relationship between mosque and state, really, to look at these where it came from. But my question really deals with the Muqtada al-Sadr, because he's the one which we really had to work with.
Muqtada al-Sadr.
Yes.
Yeah.
The main conflict which we had was between the Shia and the Sunni groups in Baghdad. The rest of the country was already segmented. This was the Shia part of the country, this was the Sunni part of the country, this was the Kurdi part of the country, but Baghdad was the focus of where everything came into conflict. We used the term militia only for Shia groups. We used the term terrorist only for Sunni groups. So in your topic militia, Shiite, this was always only Shiite, militia.
Yeah.
And whenever we talked about Al-Qaeda or Sunni, we always used the word fakiri, terrorist. We even did research to ask people in the street what terminology you use, so we could psychologically manipulate. At one point we convinced the Muqtada that he was not religious enough and he should go back to study, which he did.
Yeah.
Through his cousin who worked for us. It was actually his mother was the Muqtada's cousin, but he was actually, his father was Polish and he was born in Britain. So he had a total Polish name. When he arrived in Baghdad, everyone knew he was the Muqtada's cousin. And through him we convinced the Muqtada to go back to study and have a ceasefire
This was the 2007 ceasefire.
For 18 months.
The freeze.
Because he was not religious enough. So we convinced him that he was more Shiite than political. And to become apolitical as a consequence. And this generated a ceasefire, which gave us an inroad into depoliticizing the entire Sadr movement in Baghdad. So this comes to the question about only proxies. Is that, and we also know the other side of the coin, that when Ahmadinejad reserved a place in his cabinet meetings for the 12th Imam, you know, the other side of when the secular became more religious and so forth, or when Ayatollah Khomeini was classified as an imam, which was virtued as being a heretic rather than being Shiite. So this comes to the question of being, the question in Iraq of proxies, is to what extent have you found that the groups in Iraq are being a proxy of Shiite religion, to spread religion to the individual level, and to what extent are they more a proxy of a secular, per se, Tehran foreign policy to expand the border of Iran, or to make no border between Iran and Iraq, and thereby control more state orientation, i.e. is this more religious or is this more political? And if you actually project this 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the line, would you see a religious Iranian Shiite state, or would you see more of a secular Iraqi state, but predominantly Shiite, because that's the population? Which you could also say, in the long term, do you see the Shiite element in Iran dropping?
In Iran or Iraq?
Both, because if we're talking proxies, that if, for example, Tehran becomes less religious, but still with a Shiite base, it becomes more of a secular state, and its proxies thereby are doing the same. But if they're not proxies, maybe because they're more radical, would you find that the Iraqi Shiite groups taking control of Baghdad would actually transfer the religious element to Baghdad from Tehran, which is a generational thing. That already the next generation in Tehran are not so strong religious, even if they are ideological.
But they still have to deal with Mashhad and Qom.
Exactly. And because the two states are neighboring, you know, this is the proxy question. Are they really the proxy of Shiism? Or are they a proxy of a foreign policy because of...
I understand.
Or proxy of Iranian Shiism. That's also,
well.
yes.
I mean,
you prefer more questions, or you want to answer this one?
It's a complicated one, but I've noticed my answer.
You took
Perhaps
the time for all the questions I did.
Shall I immediately answer?
Sure,
okay.
Go ahead, as you wish.
I mean, the terminology, it's funny that you mention it. The terminology I picked with militia was deliberately taken from two American studies, Williams and Ziegler. Why? And I took also the International Crisis Group's report to it. Why? Because I think I made it page here. Here. That it's in German anyway. So, but I made a nice chart, which will be translated in English soon. Where I say we can view the whole thing from a total different angle, from a social angle. We have a core group which claims the truth. Whether this is the Communist Party cell or the Al-Hakim family, I'm not interested in. Then usually they build up a social organization. Whether this becomes a political party or a movement like Sadr movement, doesn't matter. And usually they also build up a violent cell. Whether this is Kurdish Peshmergas as a party militia / tribal militias, also, doesn't matter. In the plain Hezbollah breakdown, you have the Hezbollah as a political party with people, and you have the Muqawama Islamiyah militia and secret, and people wouldn't know, and so on. And this is something you find everywhere. Even the PKK functions in a nutshell like that. And in Iraq, because it's a much more tribal country, you have to put in between someone in this triangle between organization, mostly social organization, party, militia, and leadership group, deals with the tribes. And the relationship with the state is negotiated. It's an economic model. At the same time, I get so and so many. Muqtada had no access to nobody, so they were. But he had a strong social movement, so they did a little bit not so Robin Hood-like expropriation, extortion, and he didn't have it all under control. So it's a good example of there was a lot of activity in the first. I did not know this about this. I guess, unfortunately, unquotable insight you gave me. But in the beginning, it was obviously, and in one of these American studies, they also write that Muqtada knew there was something going on. He can't control armed gangs. The French authors were writing about the armed gangs and criminal gangs and mafia-like gangs within the Sadrine movement for years. So this was the first. It depends then, but the model remains more or less the same. Rather than a militia develops its own civil branch, like the Badr, now it's a huge organization, again with party, makes coalitions. But basically, it's this core element within these powerful families. And there's a French assessment from the year 2005, where they say, as long as the powerful families haven't sorted out who holds what in Iraq, not only on the clear territorial level, but also on the space of narratives. What kind of a country is Iraq? What does Shiaism mean? What we see in the last year is an attempt on the narrative level, especially remember the meeting in November 2016 where all the Shiite militias met, or all the important Shiite people met, where they were all, there was this incredibly strange photo where they were all smiling, with people who were good in killing them. But it was an attempt not only to say, well, we should think ahead about the Hashjabi and what we do now, but also on the narratives, how we negotiate what kind of Shiaism we do have. And it's now very dangerous what to say. We don't have, we're basically two people with two computers, and but we have a little bit. We have a partner who actually goes to Karbala and meets them, so we can send them a few questions. What they have now, what we understood now is that the dose of how much, if you decide as a Shiite, you're on a political level Shiite, how much of Quds must be in, namely Jerusalem narrative, Hezbollah narrative must be in, or Palestinian narrative must be in, how much of the Iranians are actually quite nice, and how much of we are proud Iraqis because we have Najaf and Karbala, and if then the Iranians should not. This is a negotiation. I think it was the Sayyid al-Shohada. Then whom did they pick, and how much social populism of the Sadr movement? So, in other words, when you have your party and militia leader, who else is allowed to shine? Is it Khomeini? It is Khamenei. It is Sadr. It is someone else. It is Nasrallah. Do you make your flag like the Lebanese Hezbollah? Do you make my flag more like someone else? Why is is using Shahmani a vocabulary? The last time I heard it was used by the Shirazi Ayatollahs. An accident? I doubt it. The second point is that it is an Iraqi scourge also on the Kurdish side, also on the Sunni side, that militia and political part, that basically it's still warlord gangs, but they are in an evolving status. They are evolving. This doesn't mean that their warlordism will stop, but it's there is an economic activity is possible. If you're becoming now part of the militia in Iraq, you can do, say, 6 months, you do two rounds, 6 months in Syria, and your access to university is free. Worth a try for many. So it's still there. And the kind of Shiaism that comes up, of course, on the narrative level, on the ideological level, it has a lot to do with Shiite sacrifice, etc. But basically, if you look now at the speech of Abadi, was it yesterday or the day before yesterday? This was about how Iraq should look like, and it looks quite nationalist and quite. Because from a Shiite perspective, what they really hated was that Sunni Arabs would this Safavi accusation. I don't know whether this was your brilliant idea to tell it, the Sunnis to call them Safavids. This really hurts. Mm-hmm. It really hurts. So they're proving that they're good Arabs. Hence their behavior in Kirkuk, with a political language where which came very close to Saddam Hussein's. Not in the same way, but it's a. So I think the nationalization phase is also for another reason important. First, how much can Iran give you more? Secondly, how old is Khamenei? I mean, it's now a waiting game. Sistani says, I prefer that, I'm so polite, Mr. Khamenei might see the paradise before me. And Khamenei says, no, I'm so polite, Mr. Sistani should be in paradise before me. But it's a waiting game. Everybody knows these two will be done in a while. We will be at the funeral. Do we know what happens to Iran, to Najaf and Karbala afterwards? We don't know. Honestly, we don't know all these plans, what happens afterwards. The Iranians say we have it all under control. Maybe nothing happens. Maybe we get, I don't know, whom else. If I could vote, I would go for Rouhani, just because his daughter living in Austria, but but I will know. In any case, the game, if it's about powerful family, the game they are playing must be an Iraqi one. It cannot be a Syrian one, unless, and this is where the young people come in, when they think that that they are now on the verge of a new pan-Shiite issue, then they can gain something. The question is, what can they gain? What will the Syrians do with them? Very much hope that the Syrians make it clear, thank you, but go. But it's in my view, perhaps not even say the Shohadon, not even Sari, I don't think so. But these two are the ones who really could redefine their Shiaism as a new political one, which takes Iranian support for granted and tries to outdo Nasrallah. When you look at all the fan pages about Imad Muqniya and Hajr, what a hero he was and how brilliant he was, and Israel was trembling, the US was trembling, the whole Middle East was trembling, so fantastic, and he... I'm afraid, I know people who tell me, I'm on very thin ice now, because I know people who met Qais al-Khazali and told me this is an absolute rational, calculating person. I say, yes, I believe, and I also believe that I can be totally wrong. But if I would look for risk takers, who, not even irresponsible, but simply risk takers, then I would go for these two. And now with the blacklisting and so on, it's even worse. Will they keep the coal? It's a question of what they want to prove. For the time being, I think they're still listening to Mohandes, but this is for me the permanent to watch. Sorry.
Thank you. Yes, Professor Appel.
First of all, thank you for your excellent presentation. I absolutely agree with the general approach. The interrelations between the, let's say, domestic forces or domestic political arenas and the general arena. I believe that every movement, political movement, it is some kind of political arena in itself, but connected for diffusion with the other political arena, wider one. But there are many of the question of the Shiite, Iraqi issues are connected also with the political praxis. And I see in the next month, until the spring at least, until the 12th of May, 18, the day of the elections in Iraq, the main field of contest, of struggle, is inside in Iraq, inside the Shiite camp, not what was perceived regarding Iraq as usual, the Sunni, Shiites, and Kurds. Yes, there is existing, but the main force is Abadi versus Maliki. Abadi, maybe Abadi and Muqtada Sadr. And only to mention what you said is exactly, I suppose today or yesterday, Muqtada Sadr declared that the Hajj al-Sha'bi has not to participate in the elections. And this is one of the, because the strategic decision of Muqtada Sadr to enter, to change the field from military field to political field. I suppose it was very important moment in the stabilization of Iraq, on building a political system in Iraq. His decision, this something fascinating, his way of, let's say, maturing of Muqtada Sadr. He learns the lessons of the two failed rebellions of his supporters and so on, and he entered to the politics. And now they have to face the question of the Hajj al-Sha'bi, connected to Nouri al-Maliki, and so on. But he has on his side Abadi, who is able to present two success: Islamic State, the finish of his Islamic State, and his reaction to the Kurdish referendum, of the mistake or not mistake of the Kurdish referendum. What was the Abadi will present, and you have to remember that Abadi was never took part as a candidate in the elections. Nouri Maliki is much more experienced in this point. And this is, I suppose, that it is interesting to see with whom Muqtada Sadr will be connected in Iran, among the Iranian forces.
Just a moment.
Who is with Muqtada? Who is Ammar? With whom Ammar? How the, let's say, the domestic constellation in Iran of different forces relating the forces in Iraq is the one. The other thing is also interesting, I suppose very interesting, but you mentioned it only shortly, the Iranian activities on the other direction, on the direction of Pakistan. Because of the troubles in Balochistan with the Balochis, and contradictory and sometimes cooperation between regarding these peripheral forces in both of them. It is interesting, especially in the wider context, which is not only political, it's also economic. It is the Chinese interest in this area, because the Chinese is penetrating exactly this belt, between Pakistan, Eastern Iran, and this became one more factor in all this Iranian policy and the approaches to the Shiites of Pakistan and India and so on. So if you can,
they are also involved in Syria. They send a unit to Syria, the Chinese.
But it's not so.
No, it's not. Yes.
But it's to the first part. I think that Muqtada has, meanwhile, over the last years, annoyed almost everybody in Iran. So he's very much a standalone. He was in Iran for very. He obviously doesn't get along too well. Then, family-wise, he would be closer to the Khomeinis. So then also he's a proud Sadr, so claiming the Sadr heritage then brings you at a point to ask what happened to Musa Sadr, and I don't think that the Iranians are happy to talk too much about it. Also the competition with Khomeini and also so I don't see Muqtada having a real stronghold inside Iran. This is different, and with Ameri it's clear he has his family in Iran, and he comes from this very security-centered milieu. You almost can down in Farmonier or in Postoron Avenue, you almost can imagine where they live. So that's for me an easier person to pin down. That's just work to find, and then you, of course, politicians may change, politicians may decide. But from an Iranian point of view, what are the priorities of Iran? Iran has 3 Iraq policies. One is, of course, the ordinary bilateral relations, where everybody says they're good. As long as there's a crisis, they're good. But as long as Iraq is stable, we are back to 1975 Shat al-Arab. Where do we have the border Iran-Iraq? It's still going back there because, and it's not a peace treaty, it's a ceasefire. It's a UN-sponsored ceasefire. So once the crisis in Iraq is over, and even Mohammed Bakr al-Hakim told them, well, in Iraq, I have to defend Iraqi national interest, and Khomeini said, and back then also Rafsanjani said, yes, of course, he's Iraqi. The second is the relationship to the Shiites in the sense of the Marja'iyya. They cannot allow to really annoy one of the big clerics, and they have there is a parallel Qom policy. And this parallel Qom policy, some Ayatollahs, they are not really important in other fields, but in the regards to Karbala and Najaf, they simply have a say. And Khomeini has to listen to them, something he doesn't like. The third point is the Kurdish policy, and here Abadi delivered. Because Barzani was warned, everybody was on the knees before Barzani because everybody knew the trick. I mean, even people who were very enthusiastic about an independent Kurdistan told him, don't do it. And when they asked back them, I said, well, I mean, one of his cousins or nephews asked me, why not we? Everybody's allowed. Look, Israel is also. Yes, they had the Hebrew University built when they were under mortal threat. And what did you do? The Americans built a university for you. There's a world of a difference in between. There were hospitals functioning. And what did you do? If you have an appendix, you go to Istanbul or you go to Tehran. I mean, there's a world of a difference. You have to. The groundwork was clearly not done. Also, all the problems, everything which really stymied Iraqi Kurdistan, we warned them. The constitutional crisis, the mess in procedures, and so on. Everybody warned them, and from this background, the Iranians knew about this. The Iranians knew how angry most European governments were with the performance of the Barzanis in their capacity of running this region. And the Iranians knew, and they knew also their limits. And so it's kind of a small. I wrote in June how the Iranians will react. They will use it. They will strengthen Abadi, because it's a priority that Iraq is a unified country, and these problems it all looked as if it was just an internal Iraqi affair. And, so Abadi is strength. So the Iranians can both with Maliki and with Abadi, and they go it pragmatically. I don't think they support one over the other. In general, they support the stronger one. Because then on the Pakistan side, yeah, the economic aspect, the real bonanza would be the famous gas pipeline to India. It just doesn't work. There were so many on the map. It looks all good. You have the resources and so on. I remember as Austrians, we were very not enthusiastic. We saw already the money. but then someone from a transatlantic country intervened severely. We would have loved to see Iranian gas coming, and as it so happened, then coming out in Austria, and we distributed and so on. Or everything was negotiated already, but Nabucco didn't work. If Nabucco couldn't work, how could it work between arch rivals India and Pakistan? Idea is brilliant, and the future Iran, I imagine, is a de facto some kind of a Yugoslavia, neither this direction or that direction, caring about becoming an energy and transport hub. And that's Iranian politics. Well, we are not yet there, perhaps after the supreme leader, but that's a meaningful future for everybody, because it's absurd to have an 80 million economy ignored. So this is where the Chinese come in. The Chinese basically offering to build up a parallel, they come in Pakistan to build up a parallel train way up to North to Central Asia, as the Iranians do. I mean, there's already a powerful nation state which puts all its money to connect from the Persian Gulf up to Herat, and then a powerful other nation, a world power comes and says, we do the same thing in parallel because we don't like the Indians. I mean, and then if you look at the Chinese investments, I mean, it's everybody tells me it's so fantastic, and there's a Austrian scholar who may become our future foreign minister, and she says, well, it's a time of the Chinese and so on. Maybe, but look, the strange investments they had in Sri Lanka, with the airport in the jungle and the highway used by elephants. And it's a great, beautiful airport, but there's something, I think they have to do some more reassessment. You have to, what kind of cargo you want to send there when the relationship between Iran and Saudi Arabia is so bad. We can all dream from Vladivostok by train down to or say Irkutsk down to via Uzbekistan to the Persian Gulf, then take the ferry and drive through Saudi Arabia and jump over to Somalia. It's nice, yes, but remember, it costs. The investments must be done. It cannot be all be state-run, and I don't see the economy booming off. What the Chinese should, you mentioned Balochistan, I did it for a reason, because there are no, but we know about Iranian Sunnis fighting inside the IS, which is a nightmare for all of us. I also can say from a European perspective, seeing something on the scale of Yugoslavia, something like Yugoslavia on the scale of Iran, is just something which is a guarantee that we have real permanent riots in Europe. I mean, it will hasten our demise, not theirs, because in a way or the other, the mafia-like structure of the regime will survive. The coming instability of Central Asia should be something the Chinese and the Russians should care more, because we have all the ingredients here. One-party system or cliques which manage the population, which close down the political space so that only radical Islam is there, etc., etc., and poverty, increasing poverty. Can Iran become a stabilizing factor in this regard? Let them tame the Afghan Hazaras and keep a lid on that. And I think, I hope that Rouhani continues discourse, because he himself puts more a focus on rational politics than on ideological politics.
Well, thank you very much, Walter. I think there are probably more questions, but we have to put an end to this. And it was a pleasure having you here, and a pleasure
was all mine.
Studying from your researchers and from your insights. And we hope to see you more in this arena. And and I think what we can learn from all this is that has its own dynamics, and things change because everything is based on this person or the other person. This person could die tomorrow, and somebody else will come with different policies, and it's very difficult to foresee what direction it will go. And but still, for the present situation, I think it was an excellent analysis, and also for the forecast is definitely why you are a consultant in the
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.